Alright, today we're going to talk about the new Assassin's Creed trailer since it just recently dropped, and I'm going to give my thoughts and opinions on it. Not really like my usual in-depth analysis videos I try to do. This is just going to contain a little bit of information that I can quickly scrounge up to make a little overview of what we so far know. Before all that though, I'm just going to let the trailer play by itself if you haven't seen it already. If you have, go ahead and skip to the timestamp I have on screen.
They are heartless. Godless barbarians. They murder and kill blindly.
What is the soul of man?
They scar the lands of England. Lands they will never defend, never love. The time has come to speak to them in a language they will understand.
Oh, somebody tell me. Answer if you can. Oh, somebody tell me. What is the soul of man?
It's with us!
So let's just break down what happens in this video in order. So the video starts out overlooking a village by a mountainside where children are playing and the villagers are going about their daily lives, while the narrator says they are heartless, godless barbarians, all while the scene changes to a paganistic ritual taking place. It then skips to them taking a voyage to presumably a village that they are going to raid, which is most likely going to be an Anglo-Saxon territory. Now I'm first going to go very slow with the clips on this part because I love how hypocritical this scene is. First, the narrator says that they murder and kill blindly, to then show that they spared a woman and a child to remind us that these Vikings, who are raiding a village for loot presumably, are not the bad guys. then proceed to show a clip of the entire village being set ablaze and then killing the men-at-arms of the village. Also, previously, before they are gracious enough to let the woman and child go after raising the village, they show a clip of them indiscriminately chasing down and murdering the town's guard and what looks like just possibly other male peasants. My favorite is the guy on the floor who is quite obviously unarmed and begging for his life, but the guy's like, nah, you're too dangerous to be kept alive. So I get what they're trying to show by creating a juxtaposition between the narration and the clips being shown, but in the end it's almost confirming the narration to some extent. I suppose it depends on your point of views, I just thought it'd be funny to point out. After they're done pillaging the town, they transition, quite smoothly I might add, to them playing and having fun in their own village. Now, more importantly, the narrator then says that they scar the lands of England, the lands they will never defend, never love. It then reveals that the narrator is actually King Alfred of Wessex, also known as King Alfred the Great. He then concludes by saying that it's time to speak to them in a language they will understand. I'll talk more about how King Alfred, the English, and the Anglo-Saxons are going to be implemented a bit later, but let's get to the big battle scene first. As they pull up to the shore in their longboats, they are then greeted with arrow fire. Now, originally I thought it was a bit ridiculous that they were willingly going into open combat against an organized militant force, but after looking at this video a bit more, they seem a bit surprised to see the arrows, so this likely could have been an ambush. It shows them leaving their boats and it quickly cuts to them rushing the fields into a full skirmish. Now, just some quick notes on the armaments of all the soldiers at play. If we look at what I presume to be the English soldiers, I think that they do a pretty good job at recreating them for the most part, at least compared to video games of the past. As you can see, they have tunics with a belt fastened at the waist. They have types of nasal helms that would be popular for this time period. Another thing to note is that the use of the kite shield seems to be very prominent here when, as far as we know, the kite shield didn't become this well used until the late 10th century. Before this, it would have been more common to see a round shield for infantry use. That being said, I understand this design choice because they don't want their audience to confuse their Viking companions for enemies. Anyways, that's enough about shields for now. It gets pretty Hollywood in a bit, which isn't a bad thing to be honest. I'd be lying if I said this didn't look badass, but as you can see here, in this one part, a guy lobs an enemy's head clean off. Like, I understand that it's not impossible, but it's impressive to say the least. As the skirmish goes on, we get to a scene that is, again, a bit dramatic, where we see a Viking not just throw a spear and impale an enemy, but completely knocks the enemy off of his feet and into the air. He even has a couple seconds of hang time too. Now, as hilarious as this looks, what I would like to focus on is the silhouette of a building in the background. Now, to me, this looks like some form of early medieval castle. So maybe this wasn't an ambush after all, and they're trying to take the fight to them? Seems kind of foolish to me, but okay. Regardless, maybe we'll see some castle infiltrations where you'll have to sneak in and open the gate to let your fellow Vikings in. That would be pretty cool. Realistically though, the first kinds of early castles to come around were the Motte and Bailey style of castles, which don't look like what we have in the silhouette, and even if it did, those don't come around until the 10th century either. It's not really that big of an issue, but more or less a fun fact. Besides, like I always say, the gameplay will always be more important than the realism. That doesn't make it any less fun to point out the historical things and the ahistorical things though. After the guy who got javelin decided to come back down to earth, we then see the same Viking rush an enemy soldier who thought he could fight a spearman with just a sword. I guess he missed his shield acquisition day because he seems to be the only one missing a shield. Even if he had a shield, this probably wouldn't be the best idea. Also, even though this isn't really surprising, the chainmail that everyone is wearing just appears to be useless. People are just stabbing through them with broad-tipped spears and such. I'd actually be surprised if instead the armor worked like it was supposed to, but usually they don't in video games. Anyways, the spear guy gets dunked on by two guys who actually brought shields. One guy slashes him with the sword and then keeps advancing forward. The other guy finishes him off with a one-handed flail. Now, there are a lot of ahistorical things within this trailer, but one-handed flail is probably the most interesting out of all of them. We understand that this kind of flail most likely existed at some point during the Middle Ages, although very scarcely, but technically we're towards the end of the Dark Ages when this game takes place. More about that later, but I bring this up because I have a feeling we'll be seeing a mixture between medieval and Dark Age armor and weapons come into this game. The next scene we get is actually quite interesting because we get a good look at the enemy's armors. Unfortunately, my Dark Ages knowledge is very limited, but we can see that there are two different types of banners flying. So maybe the one with the cross is the English and the other one is Anglo-Saxon, or maybe they're both English and they're just vassals of King Alfred. I don't know, but what I do know is that we see more kite shields, which is cool, and we see some soldiers with short-sleeve chainmail hauberks. We see some soldiers who just have a tunic on top of a padded coat. As for the helmets, they all have different forms of nasal helms, which is also great. As for the main bad guy, I don't have much to say about him. I like how vibrant the red is on his clothing, and even the clothing of the soldiers. They don't look like they're wearing torn up rags, so that's a plus. We cut to a shot overlooking the battlefield. We see multiple banner holders, and I thought each one was a different house sigil, and that these banners were to signify that you would have to assassinate the leaders of all the big clans, but upon closer inspection, they all look like they're the same cross symbol. So maybe we might get something like that, but in this case, it's just all the soldiers of that one clan or house. Another thing we get of this shot is the right-hand man of the bad guy who had a helmet plume crest like that of a Roman legionary. That's an interesting choice, most likely an artistic one, as I can't see it being a real thing as that takes place a few hundred years later. That being said, I haven't had that much time to go and research all this, so I might be wrong. If you guys have any information that you'd like to share, go ahead and leave it down below. After that overview shot, we cut to a guy losing his leg to a two-handed axe. That's super freaking intense and I love it. That shot doesn't even last that long as the guy gets impaled from the side by a rushing spearman. As you can see, another case is someone getting completely run through as if their chainmail is made of warm butter. With a spear still inside him, this dude takes down the guy who just stabbed him and stabbed him back, I guess? His axe looks to have a small point on the top of it, but that's not really enough to truly stab someone with. As far as I understand, spikes and such at the top of the axe head is not something you would really see on Viking Age axes. I know, that's a really small thing to pick out, but the furious typing of people rushing to tell me that video games aren't real life and to stop nitpicking things fuels me. I can hear them already. Back to our resident madman with an axe. Unfortunately, he gets impaled again. This time through the back, and it's straight through like the other times. At this point, I just go into combat shirtless. It's much more of a power move, and you aren't at that much of a disadvantage. We then cut to real sad boy hours as our main protagonist, Eivor, that's his confirmed name, sees his buddy get totally skewered. He then proceeds to do the most Chad thing and take the enemy out with a throwing axe to the head. Now, the original trailer moves so fast I didn't even realize that this is what happened, but now that I'm reviewing this is freaking cool. I mean, it doesn't make sense because I don't think anyone could throw an axe through a steel helmet, but it's still freaking cool nonetheless. Anyways, the Kebab Viking dies, and then they decide to lay him down with his axe in the middle of the fight, and this part is a bit goofy. Like, now is not the best time to do that. My favorite part is that you can see the soldiers look at him in the back while he's basically performing his burial rites, and they're just like, whoa guys, don't attack. Let him have this moment. Next scene, it begins to rain and thunder, which is foreshadowing what is to come next. We get an overview shot of what is going down on the battlefield, and it just looks awesome. Now watch this next scene. We see the main bad guy look at Big Beef Legionary and give him the nod to go mess things up down there. Big Beef nods, and then when the camera focuses on him, you can see his helmet has a type of Nordic weave design on it. Now maybe it could be that he used to be a Viking, or maybe it's because he took that helmet as a trophy, or maybe it's some sort of mixed culture Anglo-Saxon heritage, I don't really know, but it's pretty cool if I do say so myself. Anyways, Eivor starts going ham and begins chopping up some enemies. Not really much to say about that except more lightning is going on. So he stops chopping on a dude and then sees a hooded figure in the distance. The hooded guy then disappears and a raven, which is a symbol of Odin, appears. He then proclaims that Odin is with us as a sort of battle cry. Now from what we were told, a raven is going to be this game's version of the Eagle UAV that you got from Origins and Odyssey. Now in the scene right after it, there's a lot going on, and I just want to quickly cover most of it. First off, I like how they all kind of stop what they're doing to look at him like he's crazy. Individually though, let's start with the far right guy. They really just took some of Jormungandr's assets from For Honor for this guy's hammer, huh? Look, I'm fine with things being unrealistic and just outright fantasy. That's okay, but does anyone genuinely think a massive block on a stick is cool? Like, there are some genuinely cool looking warhammers out there, but every time I see something like this, I can't help but think about those inflatable hammers you'd use to bop your friends with as a kid. Now, I understand that this hammer design comes from the depiction of Thor's hammer, and Thor's hammer is actually supposed to be depicting a work hammer, so it's supposed to have a big block sledgehammer head to it with a somewhat short shaft. That's just a discussion for another time, as I don't want to open that can of worms any further. Next, I want to focus on the guy in the back. Faced with two adversaries, a sword to his throat, and everything seems lost. So what does he do? Well, at least he gets rid of one of the weapons by displacing it with his axe. But it wasn't the weapon pressed against his neck. Instead, he just pushes the sword out of the way with his own throat. Now, that's a power move if I've ever seen one. It may look like the guy let him go, but actually he was just so stunned at his neck strength that he was frozen in fear. Finally, the female Viking on the left, who kinda just looks like she's wandering around aimlessly, not much to say about her, but I have a bit to say about her axe. You don't really see, except for a split second when the lightning goes off, but then you can see a very broad blade axe design, but more specifically, it has a cross stamped into it. Besides the fact that it kind of goes against pagan ideals, that overall design with a punched out cross is something of a much later medieval design. But again, this might be because she found it off of an Englishman and is using it, but also might help confirm that we're going to get a plethora of different weapons from throughout the Middle Ages as well. Moving on from that, Eivor senses a disturbance in the force, and the camera focuses on Big Beef approaching. Eivor grabs a sword in his offhand, and they both rush each other. Big Beef uses his long sword to swing at Eivor. I say long sword because it's not large enough to be considered a great sword, and even then, swords like that were really impossible to manufacture at the time. Anyways, Eivor blocks the swing, but it must have created a fracture in the space-time continuum because it for some reason sends Eivor flying to the left about 2 meters. Big Beef has a moment to let his cape wave in the wind so Eivor can get back to his feet, which is nice of him, but when Eivor gets up, Big Beef decides to throw the most telegraphed overhead strike known to man. Eivor uses this chance to end Big Beef's adventuring career and puts a sword into his knee. Big Beef, being as big and beefy as he is, does not acknowledge the literal sword that is completely stabbed through his leg, but instead backhands Eivor just to show him that he's no longer playing nice. To assert his dominance as Alpha Chad, Big Beef then proceeds to remove the sword from his leg, leaving it just completely exposed with an entry and exit hole. Although, knowing him, it probably just cauterizes itself from sheer testosterone. Eivor regains his senses and tries to attack Big Beef. Unlike every other soldier in this trailer, Big Beef's armor actually works, and he just sits there as the axe can't penetrate his helmet or scale armor. Big Beef, tired of playing games, decides to give Eivor a little love tap with the pommel of his sword. He then proceeds to do some cuts at Eivor that end up getting blocked, but on the final one, Eivor's axe breaks. I genuinely find this part interesting because that is one of the downsides of using an axe defensively without a shield, and it happens to break at the most common weak point for where axes usually break, which is towards the head of the axe. This almost makes me wonder if there's going to be a weapon degradation system in the game. Anyways, Eivor, losing all hope, apparently thinks that he can kill Big Beef with just a broken wooden shaft. Big Beef, not having any of it, gives Eivor a headbutt that sends him into the next dimension, just enough time for the camera to pan out and show that everyone's gathering around like it's a schoolyard fight breaking out. Big Beef then decides enough is enough and goes to take a hands-on approach, at which point he puts his sword to Eivor's chin? It's not really his throat because his hand is covering the throat, and even more so, Eivor's beard is in the way, which albeit won't stop that much, but cutting will be a bit harder if it gets in the way. Anyways, before Big Beef finishes the job he was literally sent to do, he looks back to see if his dad is still in the bleachers watching the game. His dad sees him look and he waves, "Hi, son." Big Beef turns around and then is greeted with a hidden blade to the eye. I think that's fantastic. This is exactly what you would need to do if someone was too heavily armored to attack anywhere else. Here are some examples on the Gladiatorian manuscripts showing depictions of this technique. The only real problem I have is why didn't Eivor do it sooner? But I'm sure it's for cinematic reasons. Hopefully there's some way they could add this into the game because I think it would really be interesting. Then it ends with Big Beef's dad realizing he just got his son killed and now the Beef name won't live on. And that's about it. So what are my overall thoughts about this game after this trailer? I'm pretty interested to say the least. I'd like to see some gameplay first before anything else, but this trailer was pretty cool, no doubt about it. Now, there were a few things I said I was going to talk about after I was done reviewing the trailer. First off, if you're interested, there have been reviews done by Eurogamer, Game Informer, and IGN that talk more about what we might see in the game that aren't in the trailer. I'll have a link for those in the description. With the information from the interviews, we learned that King Alfred the Great was going to be the antagonist of this game, and that's who we saw from the beginning of the trailer with all those narrations. That means that this game is going to take place between some time of 871 to 899 AD. Most likely, though, a much smaller time frame within the 886 to 899 AD. This would be within the time frame that he has the most control. Now, there's a lot they could do with him as, for example, technically his death was a mystery, so maybe he could be the final target of the game. Although, spoiler alert, I don't know if you can really spoil history, but still, technically King Alfred wins the war against the Vikings in the end. Although the invading Danes at the time kept a lot of the land conquered, the final battles are what led up to them forcing to go into peace negotiations. But to be fair, Ubisoft has bent history to however they please, so maybe things will go differently. I'm just looking forward to large-scale raids and dual-wielding axes, so. One thing I will say I am curious is how they will treat being a Viking like. Being a part of the Assassins usually entails always having the moral high ground. You know, Assassins good, Templars bad. In this case, it's kind of hard to see the moral high ground when it's confirmed that only the beginning of the game takes place in Norway, and the rest of the game you're trying to invade England while looting villages and such. We talked about it when they were just killing random Englishmen at the beginning and they were setting towns on fire. Like, we can't kill civilians because it's against the creed. But fuck their houses and everything they own, and God forbid they decide to pick up a weapon. I think, or at least I hope, they will address this because, as it seems, they kinda already understand this point of view. In a quote from the Eurogamer article, it says, "Will good old King Alf really be a mustache-twirling pantomime villain? No," lead producer Julian Laferriere assures me, as we settle down to talk Valhalla in detail. Will all Vikings be good guys? No again. But what seems certain is how Valhalla has been entirely shaped by this principle. Vikings were not only invaders, but settlers as well. They were ferocious warriors, yes, but also a group of people with a rich culture, living gods, and a huge mythology, all of which Valhalla will explore in detail. Which I think is a fair point of view, and I think that if it's done right, it can fairly express both sides of the story and give reasoning to why both sides did what they did. That being said, I have a feeling it's just going to be Vikings good, English bad, but only time will tell. Now, speaking of the topic of being on the cusp of the 10th century, that being the year 900 and onwards, I'm sure that they're going to meld a lot of the 10th century armaments with that of the 9th century, as we've already seen in the trailer. If it looks good, then I'll be excited about what I have to see regardless. Just some final notes about gameplay, which won't really have anything to do with history or anything like that, just my opinions, is the one thing that really turned me off from Origins, and the reason why I never even played Odyssey, is that the leveling system and the gear system they had. I hated how you couldn't progress without being forced to level up, and more so, you couldn't even fight certain things. Like, the game would be like, "I'm sorry, that's a level 33 hippo, and you're only level 15. Go away." It looks like this game won't have something like that. According to IGN's numbered list of notes from an interview, they state that what you can accomplish is more about gear and skills, not character level, and that every piece of gear is unique, and gear can be upgraded and customized, and you can use the same equipment from beginning to end if you wanted to. Hopefully what this means is all that gatekeeping stuff that prevents you from playing the game at your pace is gone, but what this could be interpreted as is that they're doubling down on gear score, which I would absolutely hate. Although, getting rid of level requirements is a good start, I suppose. Okay, I'm sure that there's more that could be said, especially about the concept art that I probably have running in the background, because, let's be honest, there's a lot of fantasy things in there that would just take a very long time for me to explain. But because I'm already running out of ideas, and also I just want to get this video done as soon as possible, if you enjoyed this video, go ahead and leave it a like, as it really helps me out. If you like videos kind of maybe somewhat something like this, then go ahead and subscribe. As always, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, or late 9th century English or Viking knowledge you'd like to share, please feel free to leave it down below. Besides that, I hope you have a nice day, and peace.